The following is a production of Texas Lutheran University. For more information, please visit tlu.edu.
So here we are, a month before the fall semester begins, ready to launch into the freshman experience class that we are all familiar with and love. And we're getting ready to premiere the TLU Reader. And so we have the pleasure of gathering together to talk about that. My name is Beth Berry. I teach in our composition department, freshman, and I also teach freshman experience. Mr. Barr?
So my name is Tim Barr, director of the John and Sandra Moline Center for Servant Leadership, and I was thankful to have the opportunity to talk about the work that I do in the chapter Service for the Greater Good, from good intentions to liberating partnerships.
I'm Dr. Bob Jonas. I'm the microbiologist in the biology department, and my chapter is Toxic Knowledge. It's one of the three applied ethics chapters in the book, I suppose.
I'm Dr. Judy Hoffman. I teach geography on campus, but I was asked to actually write the chapter about being a first-generation student. I am a first-generation student, so my chapter is my own personal story.
And work on this book, of course, started over a year ago when Dr. Phil Ruge-Jones had the idea, and I contacted us all and invited us to be a part of it. And so I'm wondering how you received that invitation and maybe what you were thinking when that email came across. Dr. Jonas?
Well, my invitation wasn't by email, in fact. Phil caught me in class, after class one day. I was in Langner Hall teaching bioethics, and Phil came up to me and asked me if I could possibly contribute to the book in a like manner, to some kind of ethical problem that that biologists might come across. So that was my assignment.
Dr. Hoffman?
Like Dr. Jonas, Dr. Ruge-Jones stopped me one day and asked if I would share my story, because he was familiar with my own personal story of how I came to be a college graduate. And he came to me and asked if I would take the time to write it down, and I was very happily to do so. Very excited.
Yeah, now as I came into the equation later when he started to line everybody up with the chapters, and the neat thing that came about as a result of my saying yes was that I felt like I got to know all of you so much better, because I didn't know you were a first-generation student.
Very good.
And so that was, for me, probably the bonus of working in this project, with this project.
I know that was really true. You know, I hope our students appreciate it as much as I did, and I heard other people who are part of the TLU community. You know, just like you said, you learn new things about your colleagues that you see on an everyday basis, but I didn't know your story. I even took a class with you, when I was a student here, but I didn't know parts of your story, and so that was a really exciting thing that I hope students appreciate as well as they read these different chapters.
Definitely. And I know part of what we were trying to set up was the idea that we, as writers, are chiming in on a conversation that started before this book existed. And so I'm kind of wondering how you see your chapter falling in line with that pre-existing conversation about bioethics, for instance.
Well, it was kind of difficult to narrow down what exactly I should write about. I mean, there are several options that come to mind, but I finally decided on some kind of genetic problem, because I think that's something that students, this generation of students, should be especially aware of, as this is going to be more and more prevalent in their lives. So that was, I thought that was something I was familiar with, and it was something I thought that would be interesting and important for their lives.
How long did that take you to narrow it down from all the possibilities to that?
I don't really remember now, but probably when I first sat down to actually do some writing, I think you think about these things, and I thought that was the best avenue to pursue.
in terms of service learning? How did that?
Well, you know, so initially I was asked to write about service learning, but my chapter really isn't about service learning. I think you could even make an argument that my chapter isn't necessarily even about service. It's about relationships. It's about the pitfalls of trying to do good and doing more harm than good. And so what I appreciate about the experience and the opportunity to write the chapter is, many of us do volunteerism. We're engaged in the community. We're engaged in our families. We volunteer in a lot of different settings. But we have a very limited idea of what it means to volunteer. What service, when are we doing service and when are we not? And so it was a chance to kind of expand that and challenge people to think deeper about how we're in relationships with people we know and the people we don't know, and some of the dangers of, assuming that we know what somebody else needs or wants. So it was fun to do that. It was fun to have that opportunity to expand the conversation on campus. We have this idea that we do a lot of service, and I think we do as a campus, but sometimes it falls into these very narrow categories. And so I want us to kind of keep looking deeper and wider at how we engage, not only in our individual lives, but as a TLU community with the surrounding community of Seguin.
And I think what I remember about reading your chapter was having moments where I felt like I had a mirror that was facing me, and that happened time and again with all the chapters. And I think that's what we're expecting our students to look at, is when they're reading the book, are you looking into a mirror to see yourself reflected back in the voices and in the experiences that you're sharing with our faculty to some extent. Would you say that's true?
Oh, very much so, and I think that's what's exciting about just the learning process as a whole when you come, whether you're a first-year student or a senior. Learning should be a lifelong experience, and if you are not engaging the self in the process, it can be a very hollow exercise. So I think the chapters of the Reader has this great potential to do just that.
Definitely. And since you were talking about your experience as a first-generation student, did you at any point struggle with where to put the boundary of what you wanted to share and that kind of thing?
To a certain extent, but I mean, I did share a couple of stories that were very, very open and honest to try again to educate all readers what it's like to be a first gen. And then also as a way as the first generation students to know that their experience is not unusual, because I know when I was a first gen, I often felt, or I was asking the question over and over, is this normal? Should I be feeling this way? Because I had nothing else to go on. So by putting in some of the more honest moments, it lets those people who are here to go to college for the first time that it is okay to feel this way. So.
And I can hear in what you're saying that you very much had the students in mind as you were writing.
The whole time.
I definitely felt that when it came time after the editing process. Dr. Rugi Jones was very sweet about asking me if I was interested in writing the introduction. And I think that I just had all first-year students that I've had in the past very much in mind as I sat down and struggled with what to say, and I felt like if I just tried to address them as directly as I could, that would be the way to go. So I hope that comes across, that they feel as though this is written for them.
Yes.
And
audience is always a challenge, right? When you're writing, figuring out, do you meet your audience where they're at? Do you, how far do you kind of go beyond maybe where you think they're at to hopefully get them to engage and to think more critically about any of the topics that we covered in the book.
Right, because we also knew that we were going about putting together a scholarly text. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that, about the writing that we did in terms of the scholarship and working in the sources. Did you have some thoughts on that, Dr. Jonas, and how you integrated sources?
Yeah, my essay went through several changes, as you know. I got good feedback from our editors, and really appreciate that. I mean, I started out with a third-person science fiction perspective. If you remember, my first attempt was, and the only remnants of that is in my bio sketch. So if you read that, but I modified that, and so we came up with I think the basic draft, the second draft, I guess, was more just a straight bioethics problem. Didn't deal much with the science. I tried to be really light on the science, in fact, because I know that we have a large, diverse group of freshmen, and not all of them are particularly interested in probably science and DNA. But then I got further feedback that, you know, this is probably the only science essay in the book, so I was invited to throw some more of the nuts and bolts of DNA discovery and that type of thing in there. So the final product is a product of several revisions as I was trying to work through these different models, and really what we kind of wanted the essay to explain, I think, changed. I was real kind of light on my references, especially after reading some of the other essays. I realized that, but I think most of it's pretty common knowledge among biologists, so I really didn't look too much up. It's textbook stuff that's in any general biology book.
Common knowledge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Hoffman, any thoughts about the scholarship that you brought to bear in your? Did you have references?
Well, I mean, being most of my story, or the article is my own personal story,
Mm-hmm.
but I did go and research for myself. Well, one, I wanted to define what a first-generation student is,
Mm-hmm.
so I have some definitions on that. It was interesting to see the multitude of definitions that were out there. And then looking at some of the national trends, I think it's exciting to see more and more people going to college these days. I think our economy is such that you have to have a college degree for most of the jobs that are out there. And that opens up the doors for more first-generation students. So out of curiosity, I began looking at the numbers, and I was very surprised that on a national scale, the trends are much higher than what I thought. 30 to 40% of a body can be first-gen. And then that raised the question in my mind. So good scholarship and good research, often when you begin to ask a question, you'll start asking more questions and you dig deeper. And then I asked about TLU, and I was very surprised that in some cases almost half of our incoming first-year students can be first-generation students. So even though it's a personal story, my questions brought in more scholarship and added some statistical significance to what I had to say.
And you mentioned learning something that reminded me of when it came time for me to document the sources that I used in the introduction. I am more familiar with MLA, but for other reasons decided to use APA, and that was new for me. So by the time it was time to clean things up, I literally was learning the documentation process as I was putting the final touches on it. So that was a little bit intimidating, but I can remember posting to Facebook, I'm learning just like a student would learn who's writing for my class, and this is really humbling, and it really put me in the hot seat, and I think that was pretty good for me.
Well, learning
Definitely.
never stops.
Right, definitely. So, well, I know we're also thinking about students in their first year and what we hope for them in terms of what this book will contribute to how they experience their first year. So I'm wondering, Mr. Barr, if you had thoughts on that.
So we were just talking about scholarship, and as I was thinking about that in terms of my chapter, it has a lot to do with telling stories. And one of the purposes for getting our students out into the community through civic engagement or service learning is to expand the classroom, to recognize that knowledge is not just found in lectures or conveyed in the formal walls of the classroom, and there's a lot that we can learn in what academia has come to see as non-traditional sources, although these are the ways that knowledge has been transmitted for so long. And so as I think about you know, students and what I hope they get out of the chapter, there's a big world out there. Don't get stuck in the TLU bubble. I often talk about, in my own time as a TLU student, the two places I knew in town were HEB and Walmart. I knew how to drive all the way across town on the main drag and come back. But you could have taken me a block off of off of Court Street, and I would have been so lost. I had no idea where I was. You know, if you'd blindfolded me and just left me there, I wouldn't have had any clue. And so I really hope that our students see themselves not just as students at TLU or residents of this campus, but as residents of this larger community, as people who are connected to the fabric of Seguin as well. And I think that takes some intentionality of where you shop and what you do with your social life, and also how you spend your free time and those kinds of things. But also engaging in local politics. It's a comprehensive thing, and it's not just a process that happens when you're a college student. We want our graduates to be people who engage their communities, who are leading lives that make a difference wherever they are. And if you just see yourself as a college student when you're at TLU, and you just see yourself as a person doing work when you graduate, that's not the fullness of the TLU education. That's not ideally what we hope for. So I think that's part of the reason for writing the chapter and hoping that our students get engaged, get involved.
Makes me think of last, or maybe 2 years ago, when I had my first year group of students go in a house not far from TLU and paint the house that belonged to Mrs. Bird. And here we were, it was a hot day, we painted a house, then we sat down with Mrs. Bird, and she started telling her story. And that moment, the kids later, the students reflected, yes, it was great to paint and we felt good, but they talked more about what they learned sitting on that front porch with Mrs. Bird about just what Seguin was like when she was growing up. And that's the kind of experience that's going to last long beyond the years when they're here on this campus. So that's neat.
That's what they'll remember.
Oh, very much so. They'll never forget that day, I think.
Any thoughts about first year expectations, hopes for our students?
Well, I think as they go through the reader, they're going to see a lot of interesting essays, interesting topics, and I just hope that they follow up and pursue some of those. I think I'm not sure how many of them will actually read my essay, since it's one of 3 that the professors get to choose from, but if you do, I hope that it's interesting to you and that it stimulates interest in genetics and personalized medicine and all these types of things, genealogy even, which is related to DNA now. My two references are both websites, and so you can go there, and they're pretty good about explaining genetic diseases and those types of things, and the Human Genome Project and all that. So I think for me, it's a very exciting time to be in biology, and that's my passion, but I know other students will have other passions, and I just hope that they're open to exploring all the avenues that they're going to see in this reader and throughout their freshman year.
And something that you said about, there will be some picking and choosing in the book, but students, I think we would all recommend that they read the entire book, even if it's not assigned, and hopefully they'll find themselves wanting to. And it kind of makes me think of the book as being a kind of buffet line, where there are some choices, but if they can sample just a taste, I think it will get them started of thinking about so many different subjects, and so there's that, and
mine's the shortest of the 3.
I had another thought about in the end, another hope that we might have for our students maybe after their first semester, and certainly after their first year, is that they might feel like they could write their own chapter that could be added on to the TLU Reader, because they will have gained their own experience and knowledge, and hopefully feel like they can add to what we know about what it is to be a Bulldog.
And look at the example of our great alumni here. So.
Oh, that's true.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's right. But too, I mean, again, having read quite a few of the stories, I think this is also a book that I would encourage students to read again their senior year, because I think it'd be a neat snapshot of where they were when they were here for their first year, and then again their senior year. And what makes, I think, so different is that these are the voices of their own professors and staff people who work here, and in many cases being alumni of the university themselves. And I think it'd be a fascinating process for them to take that own self-examination of a snapshot of how far they have traveled. Because I think that, I know, again, speaking as a first generation, when I walk the stage, and I write about this towards the end of my article about how when I walked that stage to get my diploma, it was just, a 30-second walk, but it felt like it lasted for a long time because of all the things that were going through my head. And I write about some of that, but some of the other thoughts that I did not put in there is how much I had changed and was so unprepared for that transformation of that process that I had by being a Bulldog here. I think it'd be neat to read some of those, and then I like your idea of writing their own story. Then hopefully they would do that.
Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts about the TLU Reader. I look forward to, of course, we all look forward to finding out what the students think.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.